The discussion I had my senior year with an economics teacher. I had struggled my senior year. I had taken economics kind of on a whim, and this poor man was, tutoring me, trying to desperately get me to understand microeconomics. And I told him I was going to work at the Wall Street Journal, and this just look of horror came over his face. It's not possible. And I said, oh, don't worry, it's the editorial page. They're not interested in whether I understand economics. So I went to the Wall Street Journal, and I quickly realized that actually major newspapers want you to do reporting. So this was a revelation to me. It may not be, obviously, to most people who walk in the door. But I had never actually called anyone up to ask them questions or interview them. So I was working on just doing a lot of proofreading, and I was trying to figure out a way to get my name in the paper. I was just an intern, so there was a time limit on this. Like, I really needed to work on this fast, because once I was out the door, I was convinced they would never want to publish me. So I attached myself to this one very nice editor, and I said to him, there was an article that ran on the editorial page. I still remember, it was about two girls who were admitted to the National Honor Society in Kentucky. And when it was learned that they were young single mothers, that is, that they had given birth during high school, the National Honor Society kicked them out. It said, this is not just about your grades, this is also about your character. And we think, young women who go and have children out of wedlock, that's not the character we want to encourage. So we ran a piece on the editorial page that praised the National Honor Society for this decision and said, well, we should be upholding character. So I went to the editor and I said, this is ridiculous. I said, there are lots of young women who presumably have sex in high school, and then they go and have an abortion. They don't, keep the pregnancy, but the National Honor Society never finds out about them. So this seems like a pretty harsh decision. So he said to me, well, look, Naomi, the problem is I can't run one opinion on this one day and then run another opinion on it the next day. We're an editorial page, so we kind of need to, stick to things here occasionally. I said, all right. He said, but we had just launched a religion column at the Journal a couple of years, actually 1 year, I think, before I got there. And he said, well, do you know anything about these religious beliefs of these young women? I said, well, how would I know anything about their religious beliefs? He said, well, you can call them up and ask them. And I just stared at him. You want me to what? So he said, sure. He said, they have lawyers. You can find out, get their contact information. You say you're calling from the Wall Street Journal, they'll talk to you. I said, all right. So I went back to my desk, found the contact information for these two young women, and they, told me kind of an interesting story about their religious upbringing and, how they go to church and how they, didn't believe that they should have abortions and that they didn't want to compound, what they thought was their mistake in having premarital sex by then going and having abortion. Anyway, it was an interesting story, and I wrote it up, and what I found, it was actually a lot easier writing when I had these other people being quoted in the story. And again, revelation to me, probably not a revelation to a lot of reporters, but suddenly I didn't have to come up with all the words by myself. I didn't have to come up with all of the reasoning by myself or all of the opinions in the piece by myself. It sort of wrote itself. And, to boot, I actually found it really interesting talking to people about religion. So I had not taken a single religion course in college. I didn't know anything about the subject, anything about any religion other than the one I grew up in, which was Judaism. It was very eye-opening. I sort of wish going back that I'd actually taken a course or two in religion in college, because I never realized I would find it so interesting. But for me, journalism sort of became a new education for me. It became a way of calling up people and asking them questions that I could have sat in a college course and found out something about probably too. But since I had already graduated from college, this was one way to go about it. So I did that for a while. I worked at a few different magazines. And then I